Troy, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking about the service that you have and all the experience that you have that has gone into that. I'm kind of curious, where did you get the idea for Have I Been Pwned, and how did that come to fruition?
Kind of accidentally. Like, I'd really like to sit here and go, I had this grand vision and I knew exactly what to do and it was all like master planned, but it was very sort of accidental and organic. So I remember in late 2013, I'd been doing a lot of writing about data breaches. So I remember writing about things like there was the Gawker data breach, and then there was a lot of Twitter spam trying to sell acai berries because people were reusing the same passwords. And then I was looking at things like, let's look at the Gawker data breach and the Sony data breach and join together on the email addresses and then see how many people have the same password. And wouldn't you know, like a lot of people use the same password. Isn't this interesting? And then the Adobe data breach happened, and there are 150 million something people in there, including me twice, so my personal address and my work address. Uh-huh. And I kind of thought, I wonder how many people actually know, right? Like, okay, Adobe's sending notification emails and things like this, but how many people actually get the email and it doesn't go to junk, and then they still remember in a year from now, whatever it may be. So I thought, I'll create the service. So that was sort of like motivation number one, give people a facility that does pretty much what it still does today. And then motivation number two was, hey, I can build something cool on the cloud. Like a lot of this was me wanting to scratch an itch to build something, because my corporate job, because of what happens in technology, I was like not doing as much coding as I used to, because apparently that's what you got to do if you want your career to progress. Stop doing the things that you like, and a lot of people.
Sounds familiar.
I was like, screw this, man, I'm going to write some code. So it was really those two motivations which actually got me going with Have I Been Pwned. There was no sort of great epiphany or anything like that.
That's very similar to how I started whatismyipaddress.com. Is it was just initially it was just this was back in 2000 when Google didn't answer the queries like that. I don't even know if Google was really even around then, but it was when you're inside your corporate network and you need to know your IP address, it's like, well, I don't know what is it. And
yeah, right. I didn't actually know that was you. I use it all the time. Seriously.
That's a blast. And it was funny because
it's funny because I use a lot of the time where I'll show people how VPNs work, and it's like, now I'm in Sweden, or here's the Tor browser, look at this, I'm in Turkey. Yeah, that's cool, sweet.
And that's I finally ultimately figured out that at this point, that's actually a lot of the reason why people are using my site. It's not so much that they're using it because they want to know their home IP address. It's the confirmation that their VPN is working. Which is really neat. And it's, is it really saying, Turkey instead of Southern California or Eastern or Western Australia? Yeah. Obviously, that information can get a little bit fuzzy, but at least as long as it's not, as long as it's showing an IP address different than your own, you're usually pretty happy camper.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's awesome. Well done.
So, so you launched the site, and at what point did you realize that, like, oh my gosh, this is actually getting a lot of traction, either with data breaches coming in or with people starting to use the site?
It wasn't too long. It was sort of a few weeks, and that kind of surprised me. And the reason it surprised me is that it suddenly hit the press, and I'm really curious now, because one of the sort of things I did, which has actually worked out really well on multiple fronts, is I wrote about pretty much everything that happened. So as I was going through having this sort of massive growth, I'd write about things like scaling problems and how I solved them. I guess, and maybe part of this is like maturity as well, where over time you're sort of happier to say, oh, look, I screwed something up, and I don't mind talking about it. But I was taking all of these events as sort of lessons and writing about them, and people were like, wow, this is really interesting. Thank you for sharing this. So I think it was only sort of a few weeks in, and I think I wrote something about, what was it, too big for Google, because the thing that suddenly struck me is that I was having problems with Google Analytics, because Google Analytics were going, oh, you've actually got too many requests, we're going to have to downsample you. So this was this was the 10th of December. Now, I launched the thing, I think only like a week beforehand. There's a blog post here, too big for Google, Analytics fails you. And it wasn't crazy amounts of traffic. It was 90,000 in a day or something by the look. Oh, no, that was in an hour. Okay, that might have been it. So I've got a quote in here. Once you hit over 200,000 visits per day in Google Analytics, they start to downsample, which is interesting. So I think I hit 243,000 in a day.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is now, I think the biggest I've had since then was like 10 million in a day.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I thought that was big. But it was actually, that must have been within like a week.
Oh my goodness. I think people would be very jealous of that success.
And it's like, no one's more surprised by the success than me. Trust me. It's not like I was sitting there going, I don't sit back now and go, I knew all along this would be amazing. It was not that at all.
Yeah. So since you've started to do this, how many data breaches have you actually loaded into your platform now, if you can, or a ballpark?
Yeah, it's 400 something, 430 as of the time of recording, just under 9.5 billion breached accounts. And there's one in particular I'm dealing with at the moment that will push that well beyond 10 if I load it. And there's always a bit of a caveat here. And I was talking to my 10-year-old son about this over the weekend, and he's like, you should have like a party when you hit 10 billion accounts. I'm sort of, I don't know if we really celebrate that, mate. It's like, it's a milestone. Yeah. I don't get me wrong, to hit. Well, how many figures will that be? That'll be 11 figures, crikey. But it's not a good thing either. Like, there would be no better outcome for Have I Been Pwned than if nothing more was to go into Have I Been Pwned. But of course, it happened.
Wow. So what's the biggest data breach that you've loaded to date?
Well, all the biggest ones at the moment tend to be data aggregators or credential stuffing lists. So just look at my list here. The biggest one is collection number 1, which went in January last year, 773 million accounts. And then things like Verifications.io, data aggregator, 763 million accounts. There's an online spam box service here, 711 million accounts. And it's all these really, really big things which are just siphoning up all our data. The actual largest, I guess, organic data breach is probably the way that we'd phrase it. So, literal user accounts on a service that had a breach was MySpace. So MySpace was 359 million accounts.
That's still a crazy number of records being exposed.
It is. A lot of people had completely forgotten about MySpace, and then they got an email from me, and they're like, "Oh crap!"
It's still coming back to haunt people.
Yeah, exactly.
So, is there a particular data breach that kind of scared you more than any other data breach in terms of either size or, I don't want to reflect, the quality of the information, as in like the depth of what was exposed? Like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of either HIPAA or personally identifiable, like really personally identifiable information?
There are a number of candidates, many of which I don't think we should talk about on a public podcast, because I suspect there'll be people listening to this which would learn things that they don't want to know, because I certainly learned things that I didn't want to know when I had to look into some of these. I just let your imagination run wild with it. I think the one which is probably the most mainstream, which was massively impactful, was Ashley Madison. So this was back in 2015 era. It was impactful because not only was it well over 30 million accounts, but people literally killed themselves over this. Yeah. And it's just a really, if you sort of put the emotion aside for a moment, the emotion and the moral judgment and everything else, it's just a really fascinating breach in terms of the sensitivity of the data, the personal circumstances under which it was collected. Not everyone was there to have an affair. There are a bunch of people who are single and looking for a bit of fun, whatever, and then this data breach happens, and they might have been in there like years ago, and now they're happily married and they have children, and then suddenly they're implicated as being adulterers. And then, of course, the way all of this internal data leaked, it wasn't just data itself. It was emails and web code and the practices, the internal practices of the organisation that then exposed as well. And really interestingly also is that to the best of my knowledge, the perpetrator or perpetrators have never been caught either, which is fascinating because there was like a $500,000 Canadian reward from memory for that particular breach.
Wow, that's crazy. I think that this actually leads us into a good segue into like what are the types of scams that people can be targeted with as a result of data breaches?
Yeah, there's a few. Ashley Madison was certainly a big one in terms of people getting blackmail scams. Yep. So what would happen is attackers would just get the list and they'd literally just do a mail merge. They're like, hey, you're in the Ashley Madison data breach. Like, send me Bitcoin or I'm going to email all your contacts about it. Yeah. And of course, you're only going to get a very, very small percentage of people falling for that, but that's all you need. The one which I've seen a lot of over the last couple of years, and this one's sort of fascinating from a social engineering perspective as well, is people will get things like credential stuffing lists. So I mentioned verification to IO collection one, 773 million records. That's 773 million unique email addresses, each one with at least one password that they've used before in clear text. So what people are doing with mail merging this, sending an email, and I'll try and pick family-friendly wording here, saying, I have infected your computer with malware. I know your password is blah, and then immediately this is a social engineering bit, because people look at it and they go, oh man, that is my password. I actually use that. And then they say, I've infected your computer, I've got the webcam, I have observed you browsing pornography and enjoying the experience, shall we say. And people are, oh my God, and there's only going to be a small portion of people who are like, well, actually, this could be feasible. And then, again, like this social engineering bit kicks in. It's like, that is my password. They actually know something secret about me. And I remember I use the word password in the singular sense here, which is what it is for most people.
Yep.
And people do fall for the scam and they pay their Bitcoin. And this just runs over and over and over again. Because think about it from the attacker's perspective as well. It's a really low cost to implement. They can do it with high degrees of anonymity if they're smart about it. They only need a very, very small hit rate to be successful, and it preys on this social engineering susceptibility that we all have.
Yep, there's the emotional hook and the fear hook in there of, oh gosh, this is something that I don't want anybody to know.
Precisely.
And therefore someone has leverage.
Yeah, and you know what? Even if it's not legit, there's still the fear of being implicated, participating in an activity, and that alone is fearful as well. And if the attacker manages to price it just right, just cheap enough that people actually pay for it, but expensive enough that they're actually going to get an ROI on it.
Yeah,
it's super, super nasty stuff, but that is pretty rampant.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen I've gotten several of them. Interestingly, one was a extremely old password when, back in the days when I would recycle passwords here and there, and other ones I think was a password manager password, and I was like, that's that's obviously something very specific due to the length, and I do things so that I could tell if it is something like that. I was like, oh, okay, wow, this is a pretty convincing type of email, because it's like, well, as proof that I've compromised your computer, here's your password. And, it's like, oh, yeah.
Precisely.
And so, running the website that I do, I get people who are victims of these sort of things contacting me saying, oh my gosh, what should I do? And I had one woman contact me, and she's like, I've never gone on one of these sites, and oh my gosh, people are just out to ruin me, and they're going after me personally. So her perspective of it was that it was not that this was an email that was sent out to 95 million or 350 million email password combinations. She viewed it as it was specifically targeting her, and someone was trying to ruin her life.
Yeah, and people don't realize that they're just a number in all this.
Yeah, and that was like the hardest thing to communicate with this poor woman. It was like, no, it's not intentional. She's like, well, but they know my password. It's like, no, it's because someone's database got, and she just like, it was just ultimately ended up just being too technical for her to understand. And it's like, well, look, you haven't done anything like that, so don't pay it.
The sort of sad part of this as well, and I'm going to get in trouble now because people say it's victim blaming, but yeah, we'll do it anyway. So the sort of sad part about it is that a lot of this only works due to the prevalence of password reuse as well.
Yeah. And
the thing is that I don't think you'd ever ask anyone and go, hey, look, what are password management practices meant to be? Are you meant to have a password which is your dog's name and use it everywhere? And they'd be like, no, but you do it anyway, don't you? Yeah, because I don't really know how to do it otherwise. So people are consciously doing something which they know is risky, and there is a portion of the blame that does lie there. If it didn't have credential reuse, then what's really amazing, if you sort of take a step back from it and you go, what if every single person everywhere used randomly generated passwords in a password manager? Like, how much stuff would be different? Now we're pipe dreaming here, but a huge amount of online attacks would be completely different, including this one just here.
Yeah, exactly. So do you see things like, we're talking about using the threat of blackmail for watching porn and whatnot. do you find that there are answers to secondary security questions in these data breaches also that would reveal
Yeah.
your dog's name, the street that you grew up on, your first elementary school, all those quizzes on Facebook that ask you these questions?
Yeah, well, the Adobe data breach had that. So the very first data breach that went into Have I Been Pwned had security questions and answers. Now, not only do data breaches have security questions and answers, but your public profiles have security answers at least. Yeah, what was the university you went to? Oh, it's in my LinkedIn profile. What's your birthday? Well, I got all my mates saying happy birthday on Twitter. I literally looked up someone today. I couldn't remember their birthday. Went to Twitter because I know they got a bunch of birthday congratulations. And I was like, bang, there you go, solve that problem. Didn't even have to ask me. So I actually testified in Congress a couple of years ago, and it was all about the impact of knowledge-based authentication. Well, actually, I got that the wrong way around. It was the impact of data breaches on knowledge-based authentication. So this was what happens when someone is in a data breach and things like the mother's maiden name's in there. Because the trick with things like mother's maiden name is it's a static KBA.
Yeah.
You can't go back and change that. You can't go and change your birthday. If it was dynamic KBA, so something such as, what's your favorite food today? Well, you could change it. But then, of course, you've got another problem, which is, my favorite food changes. What's your favorite movie? How many times have you seen that? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I haven't seen them all yet. I have a long life to live. This is going to change at some point in time. So that makes things difficult.
That has been one of the ones that is most frustrating to me as a consumer is when you're forced to choose a question, answer a question that has something that will change. What good one?
Yeah.
What was your favorite movie? Well, 5 years ago it was this. Last week it was this. 3 years from now it's going to be that. Now I have to remember 3 different movies for 3 different, different things.
This is really a remnant of a bygone era where this worked really well 20 years ago, right? Yeah. 20 years ago, we didn't have anywhere near the attack surface or the risks or anything like that we have today. The other thing is that 20 years ago, we didn't have access to a lot of other identity verification methods that we do today. So, for example, SMS is absolutely ubiquitous today, not so much 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Soft token authenticators like we all have on our phones just simply weren't there 20 years ago. They are now. U2F keys weren't there. They are now. So I've got lots of other ways of doing identity verification, but the reason things like knowledge-based authentication questions prevail is that the one thing they have going for them over and above every single one of those other mechanisms is everyone knows how to use them.
Yeah.
And I've had this discussion so many times before where people are like, look, there is just nothing good about either passwords themselves or things like KBA. And so, well, actually there is. And no matter how good your technical solution is to replace one of these things, the one thing that you cannot argue about is that you can go to any single person on the street and say, what's your date of birth? Or what was your mother's maiden name or the first school you went to? And they know. Yeah. And it's a weak form of identity verification, but it's one that every single person gets. And that actually has a lot of value.
Yeah. And that's always going to be the challenge, is that it's not, best practices for security professionals are more likely to be able to handle, a key fob token or a software authenticator, whereas my grandmother, you ask her what a security token is, and it's like, I don't know, is that what you put in an arcade game?
Yeah. Well,
there's this knowledge gap.
You're spot on, and this is where we've got to sort of get the commensurate security controls to work with the different demographics we're working with as well. So I think about my parents. They're in their early 70s. My father uses a password manager. I've got him on 1Password. For the most part, works pretty well. My mother, not so keen. Mm-hmm. So she has a password book. She writes passwords down. And some people lose their minds over that. Even today, someone tweeted me a photo of one of these books you can get, password book. And they're like, look at this stupid password manager. It's not even encrypted. And I wrote back to the person, and I linked to a blog post I wrote that was titled something like, password managers don't have to be perfect. They just have to be better than not having one. And I sort of said, look, this password book is better than what 90% of people are doing right now.
Yes.
Because if you get the book, and let's say you create passphrases, unique passphrase for every single website. Well, now, no more credential stuffing.
Yep.
Now, no more guessing the password. Your problem is someone who can break into your house. And the person breaking into your house doesn't want the book in your desk drawer. They want your freaking TV or just the entire computer, right? Like that, you're going to have a different problem. The password's not going to be the problem.
You're talking about password books. I know someone that she would carry a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that was folded up and like 6 years old that had all of her passwords on it that she kept in her purse all the time. And every time I saw her pull it out, I cringed over it. But again, like you say, it has passwords on it, and that's not what people are looking for when they're stealing purses necessarily.
I really like, maybe because I'm just like being a bit anarchist, but I really like the premise of challenging people's assumptions about how authentication should work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other one that's fundamentally changing at the moment is this ridiculous premise that you should have password composition requirements, because if you have an uppercase and a lowercase and a symbol and a number, then you will be better than if you don't have those. And I do this really fun talk where it's amazing. Like, no matter where I go in the world and do this, I always get the same result. And I say to people, like, imagine you've got an audience, there's 1,000 people there. And I say, okay, imagine you want to use an all lowercase password. You go to the website, and the website says, you've got to have at least one uppercase character. What do you do? And simultaneously, across all cultures, everyone goes, we capitalize the first letter. And then everyone starts laughing because they're looking around them going, oh my God, everyone's worked this out. And then I go, okay, so then you've got to have a number. What do you do? And they say, I just put a 1 at the end.
Yep.
And everyone's still laughing, and it's starting to get nervous laughter, because I say to them, it's like, if you have worked this out and all of you are doing the same thing, do you think maybe the hackers have worked it out as well? So, that's a really interesting one. And then we sort of get to the point of going, okay, well, if you do go and use, let's say you use the word password, capital P at symbol 0, all right, so character substitution. If you go and set that at your place of work tomorrow, what's going to happen in 90 days? And they'll go, okay, well, I'm going to be asked to change my password. What do you do in 90 days? I just increment the number at the end. Yep. And everyone says the same thing. And again, we sort of have this discussion and go, well, do you reckon maybe the hackers have worked it out as well? And it's just amazing that when you put it in that context, people are like, yeah, okay. And well, this is what security theater is.
Yeah. So kind of talking about strong passwords and whatnot, what can people do to protect them? What's the best that people can do to protect themselves from data breaches or the effects of data breaches?
Yeah, and I like the way you just changed that question right there, because the problem is, like, people sort of say to me, how do I decide which websites I should sign up to, which ones I can trust? And I have absolutely no idea. Like, I've got absolutely no idea. I mean, should you be able to trust Adobe? Yes. Should you be able to trust LinkedIn, Dropbox? Like, yes. And they're all here. I can see them here on the list. So, yeah, clearly there's no degree of measurement of sort of brand value or recognition or trustworthy in the organization. None of that means anything. Yeah. So all you can really do is sort of two main things. And number one is work with the assumption that there's going to be a breach. So use unique passwords. Make sure that you're not sort of using the dog's name everywhere. Now, you have to use a password manager in order to do that, whether it's a digital password manager or the book. You've got to record them somewhere. And then the other thing is, and this to me is just a really practical approach, is practice data minimization. So be selective about who you give data to and how much data you give them.
Yeah. And
I'll give you a really good example of this. There is a website called catforum.com. And I just use this example because, hey, it's the internet and it's cats, and it is literally just to talk about cats. And one of the questions Cat Forum asks you is your date of birth. So after you register, it's like, hey, why don't you put your date of birth in here? And I sort of talk to people about it and go, why would you do that to talk about cats?
Yeah.
Because that is a piece of static knowledge-based authentication. And if Cat Forum gets popped, someone will take that and then they'll be able to use that as part of the process of verifying that they are you. And what's really funny about this is I'll mention this, and then a bunch of people will say, well, because of COPPA in America, the Child Online Protection Act. So COPPA says you've got to be 13. And I was like, all right, just ask them, are you 13? And the really funny thing is, seriously, this is real. People say, no, you can't do that because they might lie. And I'm like,
well, then wouldn't they lie about the year?
And then they go, oh yeah, and keeping in mind that people on the internet, like, everyone has their own interpretations of this, and I don't know what the actual strict letter of the law is, but one of the things I've heard people say is they say, well, you're not allowed to ask are you this age or not? Now just tangentially, in Australia, if you go to a website that's, let's say you go to like a Jim Beam website or a Jack Daniels website, and that's alcohol related, it's just a checkbox. Are you 18 or not? Yes, check, bam. So clearly no verification. But let's say you've actually got to ask for the actual date of birth. You can't have just a Boolean question. And so I said, all right, well, ask for the date of birth, figure out the age. If it's less than 13, don't let them in. Like, you don't need to store this. You don't need to know what their age is. You just need to know that they are at the age of 13 or more. So this is sort of a really good example of where if you do get one of these prompts, lie. Like, I hate saying this, but just lie. And incidentally, a lot of people do, because when I get data breaches with date of birth, the prevalence of people born on the 1st of January like far outweighs any other day of the year.
Yep. I know someone who lied about his date of birth when he signed up for Facebook. And so, of course, Facebook always reminds you, all your friends, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday. So he gets all of these birthday wishes on his fake birthday. And he just kind of laughs about it because he goes, Facebook doesn't allow you to fix it. But it's like, well, should I even try to fix it? Well, like you said, everybody knows your birthday because you've announced it to the world.
This is where it also gets very messed up, and I've had a couple of experiences with Twitter recently around this. So I logged into the Have I Been Pwned account one day, and Twitter popped up a message and said, hey, why don't you put the birth date in here? Like, it literally prompted me, and I sort of went, I publicly announced it the day I launched the thing. Yeah. Maybe that's not a bad idea. Put the date in, and immediately it just comes back as you're locked out.
Yeah, because you're
under 13. It's not a person. It's a company. Like, how are you doing this?
I almost did the same thing, but I had seen there was a scam. Like, there was this thing going around that it was kind of this scam that, hey, if you set your birth date to this year, you'll get some special Twitter skin that nobody else has. But it was making you under 13, so it locked you out of your account.
But it's crazy, right? Like, no warning, no, are you really sure? No, this will lock you out. Just bam. Now, that's bad, but at least I managed to get the account back, but only because I knew people, because there are a lot of other people who I've been dealing with this for months. The one that was worse that I heard recently is a friend of mine has a daughter who's 18, and she had a Twitter account many, many years ago. Now, she's a super, super responsible, smart kid, and she's using it in exactly the way I, as a parent, hope my kids use Twitter in the future. And, she's now 18. She gets prompted at some point to enter the birthday, and she's done that. And the same thing happened. They went, you had this account before you were 13, and they have permanently killed the account. No recourse, can never get it back.
Oh, interesting.
Which is really, really...
The account was banned because it was previously violated terms of service.
Correct.
Oh,
Correct.
Dude, that's scary.
Yeah. She was really distraught because she's like, look, I've got all of these interactions, and part of this was her starting to build her online profile and her career. And then she did do a lot of blogging, things that were really good, healthy, legitimate things. So, be careful of age. It bites you the other way, too. My son, who's now 10, a couple of years ago, he said he wanted to be able to like YouTube videos so he could find them again. And in my naivety, I thought, that's a life skill. This is something that you should be able to do. So, of course, it's YouTube, so he needs a Google account. Can't get a Google account unless you're 13. No problems, I'll just lie. And then he's coming to me going, Dad, how come I keep seeing scary clowns every time I watch YouTube? Well, that's because you're 18, son. That's
horrible.
Weird. And the frustration I have with that as well is, a lot of it comes back to COPPA. Obviously in American law, a very, very small slice of the world is based in America, and then the rest of us are in other places. Now, then you get to Europe, and then they've got different interpretations of what age it should be, but it's a government-mandated kind of pattern. So if you've got, in the case of this friend of mine, a very mature, switched-on kid, they've got to be exactly the same age as the young, immature rat bags. So, anyway, let's not go down that path.
So would you say that things like, we were talking about limiting what you share, who you share it with, as far as web properties, and always kind of thinking, well, why do they need this? Do they really need this information, and why do they need it? Would you recommend, if people have the opportunity, like there's a lot of times you go on this new e-commerce site and they allow you to pay with PayPal, or you can enter the credit card number on their site. Would you consider like setting up an account with PayPal and paying through a PayPal account so your password, your password, your credit card is only stored with PayPal?
Sorry, can you please sleep? Sorry. Just got a cleaner walking in. I was thinking I need one of those little flashy lights. Now, we were talking about PayPals and credit cards.
Yeah, so I'll re-ask the question, and the editors can edit it all out.
All right, thank you, editors. Right.
So would you suggest that people use services like PayPal rather than providing a credit card to each and every e-commerce platform that they purchase from, in that you've limited the exposure of your credit card number to a payment provider like PayPal versus maybe a mom and pop e-commerce store who's using a insecure shopping cart or an insecure credit card processing system or a credit card skimmer, on the website, in order to limit like the exposure of credit card numbers?
Yeah, yes and no, and the reason why I hesitate is credit cards. I think credit cards get more credit than what they're due for how sensitive they are. Let me explain this. I've had my credit card defrauded multiple times. I don't know from where. It's just been defrauded. And what generally tends to happen is the bank gets in touch with me and they say, hey, we've noticed some fraudulent activity on your card. And you look at it and you go, yeah, that is actually fraudulent activity. So they go, okay, we'll cancel the card. We'll give you the money back. We'll have a new card in your letterbox like 2 or 3 days later, and you have to update your direct debits, and it's a bit of a pain in the backside, but like that's the extent of the damage. So I honestly don't care too much if that is the impact, and it happens, once every couple of years or something like that. Now, it's just interesting that when there are data breaches and things, you see organizations in particular pop up and they go, yeah, we've had a data breach. Well, firstly, they say, we take your security seriously, by the way. We didn't take it seriously enough. Stuff's been stolen. It's like your password's out there, your date of birth, your home address. But good news, your credit card's all right. And it's like, that's the thing I care least about. I can't change my date of birth.
Yeah.
If I've used my password anywhere else, like the vast majority of people do, I've now got a really, really serious big problem. The credit card's the easiest thing. I don't really care about the credit card. But organizations care about the credit card because they need to remain PCI compliant because that's how they sell things. Now, having said all that, these days, a lot of payment is done by providers like Stripe. So, for example, I have an API key on HaveIBeen you can buy. I never see anyone's credit card. All just goes to Stripe, not my problem.
Yeah.
So the prevalence by which your card is accessible to the service that you're literally seeing in your browser is actually quite low. Now, that said, there are other attacks. We've been seeing things like mage card attacks where they run script on the page and they get keyloggers and they capture everything.
Yeah.
Different story. There are still risks there. Now, the PayPal side of things, look, to be honest, me personally, I don't really care either way. I use PayPal for a few things if I've got a bit of credit in there. If I don't, well, then I'll just use the credit card. I do appreciate that people with debit cards don't get the same fraud protections as what you get with the credit card, so that might be a good example. But then we could also go, well, why don't we just use Bitcoin? Well, we solve a bunch of other problems with either Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. So I don't really think that's where the problem is. And with any of these things, I'm just a bit selective. I'm not going to be, if I can help it, emailing anyone my credit card details. There are still hotels out there that want that sort of thing. It's a bit weird. But, PayPal, credit card, crypto, it doesn't worry me too much. All of them have their own protections in different ways.
What about SMS versus like Google Authenticator or physical key fob? I have my own opinions about it. I think most people who have... I hear lots of people complain about, SMS is not secure. Gosh, your phone can get cloned. It's super weak. So they opt to have no two-factor authentication, which to me is like, I'd rather have weak authentication than no authentication.
No, that's just stupid. And I've heard that before as well. Now, there is a nuance here we'll get to, but there's a blog post I wrote about 2FA, I think I called it like the hierarchy of 2FA and Google Advanced Protection. And in there, we talk about 4 levels of 2FA. Talk about SMS, soft token, hard tokens, U2F. And we've got to sort of be conscious that they all have different pros and cons in terms of security, cost, and usability. So the thing that works well with SMS is that everyone can get an SMS. No one has to do anything special in order to get an SMS. Everyone understands how to get a message. Let's just say rounds to everyone. 99 point something % of people understand how to use SMS. So my parents can easily use it. Anyone who's non-technical can easily use it. There's no cost to implement it other than the cost of sending an SMS, which can be done super, super, super cheap. Now, we do have problems with things like cloning phones and SIM hijacking and all this sort of thing. But as you've just said, a password and an SMS is always going to be better than just a password on its own. Like, this is just an immutable fact, and it blows my mind that people say it's less secure in some ways, because it's not. The nuance is, a lot of people don't realize, but it is often possible to do account recovery via SMS alone. So a mate of mine, in fact, the same guy who had the daughter who got locked out of her Twitter, pinged me. I remember this. It was probably a couple of years ago now. And he said, look, one of the guys in the company he runs just had their entire accounts taken over because someone managed to do password reset via SMS alone. So you've really got to go and check very, very carefully, particularly in your key services. If your mobile number is in there, make sure that that alone is not enough to do account recovery. Yeah. Now, even then, the effort involved in going and doing SIM hijacking is still going to be a lot more than, say, credential stuffing, where you can just anonymously send out gazillions of requests in absolutely no time. So anyway, SMS is there. One of the problems with SMS, regardless of all the SIM hijacking stuff, is you can still phish SMS. I mean, you as an attacker could stand up a phishing page, say enter username and password. The form gets submitted, attacker takes that, sends it to, say, Google. Google then says, hey, we've just sent you an SMS. Can you please enter it? And so the attacker's page responds and says, please enter the SMS here. And then they just relay that SMS. So that's a bit of a problem, or relay the code in the SMS. Now, if we move into the next hierarchy of auth, we get into soft tokens. And soft tokens are great because you can just put them, on any phone like this. I've got my iPhone here. I run Authy. I have all my soft tokens in there. You can't just hijack that like you would a SIM card. And even then, like, just hijack is not always as trivial as people think. It's a lot harder, again, than like password spraying attacks. But with soft tokens, you've still got the phishing problem because you, as a human, are reading a number. And if an attacker can convince you to read the number, then you've got your problem. Yeah. It's also a problem with some soft tokens, including Authy. You can sync them across devices. If someone gets into your Authy account, what happens then? So they recommend sort of syncing and then turning off sync. Hey, you got a new one. Okay, sync. Now turn it back off again. Make sure that if someone logs into your account, they can't just sync all your tokens. You can't do that if you have a hard token. So many people would have had things like the RSA tokens before. RSA tokens you can still phish. RSA tokens, though, you can't just replicate in the same way as you can a soft token, but there's a cost barrier now. So you've got a physical device. You've got to pay. You've got to ship. It expires sometime. Yeah. So we go all the way then to U2F. And U2F is great. I'll show you U2F. I keep one in a drawer near my desk, and I've got one that looks just like this. And this is actually from a company called Fetian. So I use U2F for Google's advanced protection. So every single time I log into a Google account, I've got to provide my username and password. Mm-hmm. And then it says, take this key and like literally slide it into the PC and press the little button on it. So this little gold tab here is actually a button. And this can't be phished. So there's no display on here that someone can say, hey, Troy, read out the number. It literally has to be physically present in the machine. So that is a really, really neat way of doing two-factor, but it's got a barrier because it's a physical token. You've got to ship it to people. And it's also got a barrier over and above SMS, which is that you've got to actually understand how the thing works. Yeah. If I had to explain this to my mum, she'd be like, okay, well, I've never done this before, so what is it now? Is it a key? Can I put it in the front door? What does it do?
Well, and doesn't it also have the barrier in a sense that if you lose that token while no one else knows what it is, you're now missing a token, and now will the company just reissue you a new token, or do they assume that they're now getting phished or socially engineered to send out a new token?
Well, there's two interesting sides to this. Now, the first is, at least in Google's Advanced Protection Program, you have to have two keys. Mm-hmm. So what you normally do is you have one that can just do USB, and then I've got another one which can do NFC and Bluetooth and the things that my mobile phone wants to do, because I can't chuck a USB into my iPhone. Mm-hmm. So that's the first bit. The second bit is what happens if someone loses, say, a soft token. Now, this happens all the time because people get a new phone
Yep.
and they set the new phone up and they don't migrate the soft tokens. Well, the answer to that is that we have recovery codes. So when you first start the or the 2FA enrollment process, it's like, yeah, okay, do the QR code thing, scan it. Okay, now enter the number. Great. Now here's your recovery code. Save them somewhere safe, which a bunch of people don't do. So you fast forward, let's say a year later, someone's rolled over to the new iPhone and they're trying to set it up, trying to log into the website, can't log in. They've already erased the old phone and given it to the kids, so that's no good.
Yep.
And now you've got this problem because think about it from the perspective of the site operator. So the site operator says, hey, you came to my site a year ago, you turned on 2FA because you told us that if someone has your username and your password but not the token, don't let them in. And now you're coming back here and you're saying you've got the username and the password but you don't have the token, can we please let you in? It's like, so what tends to happen then is that you have to fall back to much more laborious offline human involvement authentication processes.
Yep.
So someone stays locked out of their account for some period of time, and then you've got to have enough information to verify identity. So for PayPal, you've got things like the bank accounts you've transferred money to, the purchases you've made, the transaction values, things like that. But that's now slow and laborious and time-consuming, not just for the individual, but for the service provider themselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like every portion of multi-factor authentication does have some there's an advantage / drawback to each one of them depending on either its technical savviness or collecting 45 physical tokens that you have to shove in your pocket every day.
Yeah, correct. And what we've got to recognize is that there are upsides and downsides to all this. Now, if we get too myopically focused on the security controls and we neglect the usability controls, then we have a big problem. And I've got another blog post which is called Here's Why Insert Thing Here Isn't a Password Killer. Because there's a lot of technologically sound solutions out there that people say, look, this is great, it's going to kill passwords, it's amazing. I get these emails all the time. Even, it sounds like a broken record, but I was just having a Twitter conversation literally this morning with someone who said, look, we shouldn't be using passwords, we should be using SQRL. Which is a standard for authentication that uses QR codes, and then you point your phone there. And I said to him, like, how many websites do you use that on? Oh, none. It's not used anywhere, but we should be using. Why do you think it's not used anywhere? Because the UX sucks.
Yeah.
And no matter how good the security controls are, someone running that site actually wants people to log in because they've got to sell things because that's how they pay the salary of the people implementing the security controls.
Yeah.
Like, it seems obvious when you say it that way, but some people just get so myopically focused on just the technical implementation that they miss that broader picture.
So is then the philosophy good enough security? Instead of trying to hit absolute security, say, we just want enough barriers to entry that it's just really unlikely that account can be compromised.
It's always a balance, right? And it really depends on what it is. Even if you take Google's advanced protection, so that this stuff works great. And if anyone listening to this has got a Google account and they really want to keep it locked down, go and turn this on. But I notice even for them, I was reading this the other day, they've got a bit of a caveat here where they say this is who it's targeted to. So if I go to get stronger account security with advanced protection, they talk about things like journalists and activists. So advanced protection is recommended for anyone who is at risk of targeted online attacks such as journalists, activists, business leaders, and IT admins. Now, I would not get my mum and dad to go and turn this on. I think it poses too much of a barrier to entry to them, and I don't think it's going to be much fun if you get locked out. I think the verification process, and they're both on Gmail, so that would probably not be much fun trying to get back into their Gmail.
Yeah. But if you're Jack Dorsey, head of Twitter, or if you're a well-known named individual, it sounds like these attacks are more likely to target whether they're governments or they're specifically targeting an individual rather than just credential stuffing and, hey, we're going to go through millions of accounts and hope we can get into one. It's rather than we're trying to get into this particular individual's account.
Correct. So I think that the sort of the right criteria to be on there is that you're either in a higher risk position or you're technically advanced enough to probably not screw it up. One of those things.
Yeah, we all want to be that person who's technically advanced enough not to screw it up.
So,
So is there any final advice that you want to give to people to protect themselves online, whether it's data breaches or just the wider sense of protecting themselves?
I think maybe as a fun exercise, and particularly for anyone watching this is a bit more technically orientated, go and try and break into your own account, right? Like to do that, the hack yourself first thing. Like you've got, let's say it's your Twitter account. You know, you're worried, could someone possibly get into my Twitter account? What are the ways? Like go to another machine, go to an incognito window, something like this. Try and do password recovery. Try and, if you've got a mobile phone number on there, can you do password reset just via mobile? Does the process disclose information such as a partial mobile phone number? Because that in itself is kind of leaking information. What happens if you've got 2FA turned on and you actually know the password? You know, does that actually stop someone from getting in? So I did this myself a little while ago. In fact, after I'd heard that story from the friend of mine who had his account taken over just with an SMS. And it was fascinating to look at the different services and go, I really need to tweak that one a little bit and that one a little bit. So I think putting that offensive hat on against yourself with a view to improving your own security posture is a really good idea.
Yep. And obviously, I'm sure you recommend everyone go to Have I Been Pwned, enter all your email addresses, and really find out. Maybe you don't want to get a little bit. It can be a little bit frightening for some people, but to really find out, like, have your accounts been compromised at some point, or are they at risk?
Because it's one of those things that you want to know, right? Like you want to know if it's happened. So yeah, definitely do that. You can do domain searches for free as well if you can verify that you can control the domain. So do that. You'll see that there's some 1Password product placement on there as well. If you don't have a password manager, go and get that and make sure that you put all of your things in there and make them unique. Turn 2FA onto all the things that you possibly can. 2FA, multi-step, MFA, whichever they want to call it. But so sort of do this proactively because it's almost a little bit like things like ransomware. Like if it happens, it's then too late later on to go, maybe I should have had backups and that sort of thing. Like you've got to do it in advance. And even today, I just went, I don't want to do this stuff, but there's a bunch of stuff I have to go and proactively do because it'll be too late if I don't.
Yeah. That sounds like a great note to close out this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat with us and maybe frighten some of us into better security.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure, Chris.
Thank you very much.